It's the moment we've all been waiting for. LS is finally a coach, and he is the head coach of Cloud9 for the 2022 split. And in fact, he actually signed for a 2-year contract. So that goes all the way through 2024. So that I think that's even more surprising. So, for people that are a little unfamiliar as to maybe why it's so exciting that LS is going to be a coach, it's not just because he's a streamer or a popular YouTuber, etc., or a popular personality on Twitter. It's the fact that he was also formerly a coach before. He had coached a team called Gravity back in the day. I want to say this was like 2015 ish, somewhere around there. And that was a North American team in the LCS, and they were actually a pretty good team. In fact, they had a lot of marquee names. Then you had his stint to where he was coaching Tempo Storm, which was essentially they were an academy team back in the day. This was like, I don't know, 2017 or something. And so he coached that team, but he also coached it remotely. So he was still in Korea while he was coaching this team. And then you have BBQ Olivers, which he had coached, which was a team over in Korea. So he, like, as you can see, this is the reason why people are excited for it. And, now he is a head coach, and he's an assistant coach, I guess, because he doesn't technically have one, and he has 2 positional coaches. So he's got a lot of fucking coaching to do, and Cloud9 probably had to sacrifice the budget of additional coaches so that they could afford LS as a coach. So that's why they had to fire like all of their coaching staff, basically. But now we get into maybe, I think, one of the biggest things that I'm concerned about when it comes to LS coaching in North America. And I think it's a question that a lot of people aren't really asking or having on their mind, which is the fact that can he actually adjust to the culture? Now, that sounds weird initially because, I mean, he's an American, but you have to realize the history of LS himself. I've been following his career for quite a long time, and it stretches back pretty far, all the way over into StarCraft, in fact. He was actually an old StarCraft pro, and he had moved over to Korea when he was 18 years old. And so he hasn't lived in America for 10 years. That's pretty insane when you think about it. And so realistically, he really isn't that familiar with like North American culture. He's familiar with Korean culture more so, and at least from the adult perspective, right? Because he got the perspective of America when he wasn't an adult, and then he moved away when he became an adult, essentially. And so now he hasn't lived here for a very long time, and so his conception of America might be a little bit off. His idea of the culture might be off, and he's acclimated himself to Korean culture, so like he's basically like a fucking honorary Korean at this point, right? Like like I would consider him more in tune with Korean culture than me, and I'm Korean. So like I think that's gonna be one thing that it might be very difficult for him to adjust to, or at least somewhat of a difficulty, I guess. So that in and of itself is something to be concerned about. Now, I want to know too about the aspect of culture of if he will actually enforce Korean culture into Cloud9 in terms of the team structure, because as we know, Korean culture is very different from Western culture or from North American culture, especially, like just for instance, the whole grind lord aspect that we see over in LCK or in Korea, right? And how all the Korean players, they practice a ton and they always play the game and whatnot. And LS is kind of like that too. He is a grind lord. Like, why do you think he's so successful with streaming? Is because he does tons of hours of content. And so will he instill this nature over into North America within Cloud9? And as we know it, North American culture as so far is somewhat against the whole grind aspect of what is, Korean culture. So will he completely do a 180 in terms of just instilling this into Cloud9, or will he, temper it a little bit to where he can kind of mold it into North American culture at least a little bit, to where it's more grindy than a typical North American team? That's something that is, I think, a very big question as to whether he will do this. And I had the same questions of the reverse aspect with Yamato Cannon when he went over into LCK, and the fact that, well, is he going to instill a more relaxed culture, because he had coached Sandbox Gaming, right? And so, and on top of that, was he going to try and change the Korean culture and say, no, like, that's wrong, you can't do that, etc. And like, LS has been outspoken about bad aspects of Korean culture itself, like negative aspects of Korean culture. And so I don't think he's necessarily opposed to challenging the specific norms of Korean culture, and then doing away with that and bringing maybe only the good parts that he thinks are good. But still, as such, that's just his opinion of what he thinks is good about a culture, and that's still going to be something different that he brings over into a North American team, right? So with that, though, and the whole grind lord mentality, how will he view solo queue practice? Because, I mean, he's been pretty outspoken about solo queue and how North American solo queue is pretty shit, and we all know it's shit too. And he's been pretty adamant about ping. Well, come on, baby, come over to North America, where you have like 65 ping and you live in LA, right next to Riot headquarters. Like, so he's gonna have to deal with that. And is he really going to enforce his players to play a lot of solo queue, right, on the challenger ladder? Or maybe he'll just fully take advantage of what is the new thing, the champions queue, right, the NA super server. Is he just going to take exclusive advantage of that and just not have his players really play solo queue, and just play on, the champions server? Maybe he's going to do that. Maybe that was the reason why he actually wanted to come over here to begin with, to coach, because he realized that was an option. And then on top of that, there was an interview from Monte Cristo where Monty interviewed Jack from Cloud9 on the Cloud9 channel. And Jack had talked about how they had a specific focus to build up their sister team because they wanted a strong practice partner, essentially. And so this obviously alludes to that, LS had a very strong influence on building this academy team as well, too. And so with that then shows that they're going to use this team as a sister team, a practice team. So he even has less reliance on solo queue. And, this is something that North American teams just really haven't figured out still to this day, which is very strange, that, LCS essentially gives you a fucking sister team, and then you don't utilize it. So it makes no sense, especially probably because you don't want to spend the budget on it to flesh it out. But since it is fleshed out within Cloud9 and the academy team actually looks pretty good, it is assumed that will take even more time away from what would be solo queue practice, right? So now they'll just get team practice and sister team practice. So I think it's very clear that he'll probably steer clear of solo queue quite a lot, but it still begs the question of exactly what he's going to do about that entire predicament. Now, another thing which I think is interesting, in the idea that we know LS and that he, seemingly has this big ego, and when this is going to translate over into coaching, like, I don't just mean his ego about the game or his ideas about the game, but also too, like, he is a high-rated player as well with League of Legends. Will he then try and teach these players on a micro basis and actually literally micromanage them in order to say like, no, you should play this champion this way or do this way in this aspect, or maybe you should be here because your champion is good at this spot, and kind of overstep his bounds in terms of maybe his ideas about mastering a particular champion, and the fact that, well, like, he's not as high rated as these other players are. That's why they're playing instead of him, right? Otherwise he would just play. And so you have this, like, will he be able to then, whenever he's challenged on those ideas, will he be able to back down and kind of cede that idea to that player if the player is correct? And so this is another side tangent of this, because I know people are going to assume this about LS and in his ego or whatnot, which is that there's clearly like a real life LS and there's a fucking streamer persona LS, right? And they're two different things. Yes, they probably do overlap quite a bit, in fact, because it's very hard to just not have your real personality at least show on camera. But with that said, you do realize that a streamer, or even a content creator, in fact, it does a lot of exaggerations in order to, and a lot of like grandiose things in order to make it more entertaining and more, popping. And it basically just tries to grab that person's attention for as long as possible. And they end up doing some outrageous shit or saying some outrageous shit in order to stay in relevance. So don't expect him to act that particular way behind the scenes when he's coaching. It's definitely not going to be the same thing, and it's not going to be as exaggerated, because he puts on those flares, and that is a part of the fake person of what LS is on stream. Right? There's a big difference between the two. I can almost guarantee it. I don't know the guy fucking personally, but for sure, like, that's just how the industry works anyways, as far as like a content creator, or as just being someone in front of a camera, right? Except me. No, I'm kind of kidding. Now we go on to the comparison of Jat, right? Everyone's just like, oh, this is very similar of Jat, and how Jat was like renowned as this great analyst and whatnot. And what did he do? He got shit on, right? And he was fucking bad. And Jat had said, like in the middle of, his coaching stint, he was like, it's actually way harder than I thought. There's a lot more shit that goes on. There's a lot more that you need to manage and stuff. And you also have limitations of certain players and whatnot, right? So I think that is an okay comparison to make. But also, too, you have to remember that, first of all, LS is not coming into a entirely super team, right? A team full of complete veterans, so that your opinion has a lot less weight, especially if you aren't well respected or well established and well experienced, in fact, because mostly that would be with conflict resolution. You just have to guide the player somewhat and, point the gun in the right direction, right? And it'll shoot the team that you want, and it'll win the games that you want, right? So LS he's not suffering from that aspect, right? So there is where the very large difference lies. Now the whole ego aspect, it's up to interpretation, like obviously Jat had some sort of ego, against Alfari or, against his players, etc. And so it's, to be foretold as to whether that is the case with LS. Now, I think there is a big difference between the two in terms of maybe their ideas about the game, because when you think about Jat, he clearly preferred a slower play style, right? He preferred like a methodical play style, something to where, you cross your T's and dot your I's. And that was obviously seen throughout his analysis and all of his commentary and whatnot about teams as he was an analyst. LS, on the other hand, clearly prefers, I think, a faster play style. When you hear him talk about teams like Damwon Gaming, or when you hear him talk about, a player like Chovy or a player like Canyon, or, Showmaker, like it's very clear that he respects the faster playstyle, especially given the current meta and the current, I guess, version of what is League of Legends itself. So I think both of them differ enough that you could see that there really isn't a very good comparison between the two, other than the fact that they were both just analysts, right? Now, it comes to, I think, the big thing, uh, which is on everyone's mind, which is the fact that he has a friendship with Fudge and Max Waldo and Vigar, I think. Maybe. I don't know. I'm not sure on that one. But he does have a friendship with both of these people. And that is, I think, one of the big bad tenets of what it is to be someone that manages other people. And the fact that it's okay to be friends with someone, on maybe an acquaintance type level or a little bit above that, but when it becomes like a deep friendship, that gets in the way of business quite heavily. I think that's what I would call one of the like sinful things of what it is to be a manager or someone that is on a higher up in terms of controlling, like, say, a company, for instance. You don't want to have that friendship necessarily inhibit your ability to manage that person. And so this may be a factor when it comes to both Fudge Factor, and Max Waldo. Less so Max Waldo because he's actually on the coaching staff, so that doesn't matter too much, especially because they're not in like direct relation, you could say, right? I think that's fair to say. Not only that, but now you don't have, what I would call good cop, bad cop. I had actually made this video. It was titled Coaching Philosophies. Maybe I'll link that down in the description below. But it talks about this idea to where, yeah, you do need balancing personalities in the coaching staff in order to be able to have a functioning, cohesive unit of coaching staff, right? But he doesn't technically even have an assistant coach. He just has two people who are strategic coaches and positional coaches. So where is he going to get this thing of good cop, bad cop? Where is he going to get a person who is more stern, or, if he's the stern person, a nicer person? That's something that I think that is massively missing with this entire coaching staff. And you could say maybe, Jack is going to be that guy, because, like, as we'll get to, I guess, preventing character clashes and personality clashes, who's going to be doing that? Because it's certainly not going to be LS, because he doesn't really have that much experience with that. And I think that's very fair to say, because he's been a streamer and he's been an analyst for a very long time, and he's just been analyzing the game. He's not analyzing how to mesh personalities together, right? So you have to get someone who is also strong in that too, because he is inexperienced at this part of what is coaching. Because, coaching, yeah, it can mostly be about analysis and how to actually provide your players like a blueprint on how to play the game. But another part of it is personality, right? It's conflict resolution. It's also, building up character of these particularly young people. And so you have to be able to do that, and you have to be experienced in order to do it well. And it's clear that LS is not experienced at it. So who else does he have to rely on? Well, I would say he can rely on his team manager, Vincent. I don't know if you guys even have ever heard of this guy, but Vincent is like their team manager. I don't know if he even appears in like videos and stuff. He probably has here and there. But I've actually like met the dude, and every time he's in like the press booth or whatnot, he's a very cordial dude. He's very nice, very friendly, etc. Seems just like a cool guy, and seems like he has people skills. And he's been with Cloud9 for a very long time, in fact. So I think that's going to be a big help. Then Cloud9 also has a sports psychologist on deck. So that will be really helpful if things break down, past the game and past maybe like petty grievances, etc., and it goes more into the psychological realm. They have a guy that's actually on deck. His name is like Gary Hoyt, I think it is. So they have a guy in the pocket in order to handle all of that. Then you have Jack, who is just a very hands-on owner, and he can act like, a liaison for conflict resolution, in fact. And you could just see just from this roster construction itself that he was very hands-on with how the roster was even built and the coaching staff, etc. And like I was saying with that interview with Monte Cristo, or actually no, it was in the interview for the reveal with LS, and the fact that he said that, yeah, like he recommended me Max Waldo and Vigar, and he kind of helped me with the coaching staff before, and so it's clear that he has a mind for the game and ideas about coaching staff. So yeah, I'm gonna let him take the helm. So yeah, like Jack is very hands-on with his shit. So if there is a team for LS to join, I think it is actually Cloud9. Like all the fucking chips have aligned in that essence. Like all the fucking Dragon Balls, like like all 7 of them have aligned in that sense for him to actually take up this opportunity. So and it's really good that he has. Like, so with that said, I'm wondering too, just on a public level, if he's going to be secretive about information about the game, like new item builds, team comps, etc. He's pretty vocal on Twitter or on streams. Obviously, he's going to be streaming a lot less, and YouTube videos, etc. But will he be like more secretive about this information? I think guaranteed to some extent he will have to be, just for competitive integrity's sake. But also too, it's just like, well, no one's really been listening to him that much anyways, in terms of like, figuring out their item builds and building that out concretely and making sure that their players know exactly how to build items, even though that sounds stupid, but really it is a skill. And so is he going to be very secretive of this, just because of the past issues of what has happened, that teams really haven't picked up on it. So let's get to one of his big advantages that I think he has, which is that he brings with him a Rolodex of contact info, right? A basically a phone book that he can look up a contact list and say, oh, I can hit up this person in LCK, or I can hit up this person in Europe and figure out what's going on over there in that meta. And obviously he has the Grindlord aspect about him, that he'll watch multiple different VODs of different regions anyways. So he'll have a clear idea of himself, but he always has that option to talk to other people about the game. And so I think that's incredibly beneficial for Cloud9 and their coaching staff. So I think the final question that has to be addressed is, can he handle the pressure of being a coach? And not only being a coach, but also being LS and being a coach, because this is what everyone's been waiting for, right? Like this is all the chips are down, right? This isn't on the same level, but this would be like if Apto played in the LCK, right? Like I don't want to give LS too much praise, but this is, in a similar vein. Like you could see where this is going, right? So can he actually handle the pressure? Because everyone is expecting him to put his money where his fucking mouth is. So, because he's always been outspoken about the game, he's criticized a lot of players, a lot of teams, said a lot of people were shit, so this is the time for him to buck up and actually show that he knows what the fuck he's talking about. And, as I said, I had made a video about him, talking about how I think this was over in 2021. I made a video about him and how I think his view about the game is of a theoretical physicist, and that most of his ideas are theoretical because they've never actually been fully applied. And so now he gets to fully apply this. And so now he becomes an actual scientist or an actual physicist rather than theoretical. So on top of that, I say if he can handle the pressure because we've seen, from his various streams and whatnot, how he's talked about how he's having a difficult time, with fans or with social media being outraged at him, etc. And, we've seen him having to like deactivate his Twitter for a certain amount of time or just cut off social media entirely. And so he's going to get a lot of hate, especially on his first loss. His first loss, dude, I can't imagine those fucking DMs. Like it's gonna be wild. And those post match threads, yeah, they're gonna be fucking popping. So, is he gonna be able to handle all of this pressure? That is to be foretold. But I am very excited about this move. I think it's really a big marquee landmark signing, and we'll just see if LS is more than just all talk, and hopefully he's not all talk and no show.